This is a gunfight in downtown Ramadi, Iraq. That's the Blue Mosque. There's a photograph in the book of me standing next to that mosque last December without a flak jacket and helmet. I've been down that street probably 90 times. Every time I was with a Marine or an Army unit with the Navy SEALs, and every time we got shot at and I found myself crawling through sewage. The one taken last December, I'm standing in front of that Blue Mosque. You can still see the bullet holes in the side of the wall around it. No flak jacket, no helmet, just walk down the street because that part of the war has been won. This kind of thing is not happening in Iraq today. That, by the way, is a sergeant major who's the recipient of the Silver Star. That's a company commander. I've got to tell you a quick story about him. His name is Mark Carlton. He was a company commander in 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. And in this particular gunfight, the RPG went off literally at the edge of his feet because it was fired from a prone position. He's got 80 some odd holes in him at this point. He's got battle dressings all over him. He walks up to the battalion commander. I followed him up there with the camera. And the battalion commander's picking metal parts out of his flak jacket and says, Carlton, if you go down for loss of blood because he refused to be medevaced, I'm going to have you court-martialed. Carlton says, okay, I'll be fine, sir. 2 hours later, he passes out. The corpsmen put him on the helicopter and they take him off to the field hospital. About 3 hours later, I end up on the same helicopter going to the same field hospital. I walk into the field hospital and there's Carlton sitting there buck naked on a gurney, waiting for the guys to come back that are filling out the paperwork to ship him to Landstuhl, Germany, which is the great trauma hospital in Germany where all these guys out of Iraq and Afghanistan and all over the Persian Gulf get sent. Carlton's seat now, he's buck naked because the first thing they do with a guy shot full of holes like that is they come in with these little miniature jaws of life and they cut your uniform, your flak jacket, everything right off you and they lay you out there and they realize metal inside him, they can't MRI him, so they're going to x-ray him and they see all these pieces of metal in him and they say, you're going to Germany. Carlton sees me walk in off the helicopter because I'm ambulatory and he says, where's that helicopter going? I said, well, it's going back to the base because he sees his corpsman there, the guy that medevaced. He says, let's go. Carlton picks up all of his gear, buck naked, walks out to the helicopter. And we fly back to Hurricane Point. The tank commander sees him, it's now 3 o'clock in the morning, he sees him and says, Carlton, what are you doing back here? You're supposed to be on your way to Germany. I'm fine, sir. He says, Carlton, so help me. If you get an infection from this stuff, I'll have you court-martialed. 2 weeks later, he's got such a raging infection, he's about to lose his leg, and they ship him off to Landstuhl, Germany, eventually back to Balboa. And about 6 months later, I'm out in California to see the unit when they come back, and they're having their Marine Corps birthday party, and there's Carlton, who's, recovering from all the surgery and all the infections and everything else. And his wife has framed, a great big frame, 3 documents. 1, the Purple Heart for 83 holes in your body. 2nd, the Bronze Star for heroism that day. And the 3rd is the letter of reprimand for going AWOL from the hospital. How could you not love these guys? This is, I show this picture. Land is laughing because he knows what I'm doing. I'm ducking because somewhere back there behind me is a guy who's just shot at me. And I never even heard the 2nd shot. But in the tape, you can hear the 1st shot go by my head. And I'm down on the ground rolling in the sewage. And as you can see, there is sewage right behind me. And I'm now rolling in it. My cameraman's rolled off the camera. And I'm hunkered down. Standing back behind me is a bunch of Marines. You notice the one on the far left of the screen has reacted to the shot. Instead of looking at the who shot at, he's looking to see that they get the old man. And the next thing you hear out of the mouth of the gunner, whose name is Tagliabue, you can hear Tagliabue, who's standing behind one of the T-walls back there, say, amazing how fast an old man can move when he's properly motivated. No sympathy whatsoever. This, by the way, the picture you just saw was taken about 5 minutes before this picture. Okay, now I'm behind the T-wall, and I'm standing behind the counter-sniper guy who's looking for the bad guy. But you notice who's behind whom at this point, right? I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid. This is Afghanistan. Last summer, in fact, just about this time last year. That's all that's left of a Humvee that was blown up by an improvised explosive device, planted in the road. Corporal Figueroa and Sergeant Courtney Rausch, who we had covered in previous deployments in Iraq, are both in that vehicle. And my cameraman, Chris Jackson, is in that vehicle. The IED goes off right underneath it, and immediately the vehicle just explodes in flames. All the ordnance inside is on fire. And so, by the way, are Sergeant Rausch and Corporal Figueroa. My cameraman, and that's him right there, that's Chris Jackson. my cameraman. Now, there have been over 7,000 reporters and journalists and correspondents and guys carrying cameras out there in this war. There's only one that's been decorated for heroism. And it's because Chris Jackson jumped up, raced back to the vehicle, even though it had been blown out of it. The back doors were blown right off it. Jumps back up, runs up, somehow jerks open the door and saves Sergeant Rausch's life. Wow. That's the helicopter that took Rausch out. The next thing that happens is another helicopter comes in and the Navy corpsman comes running up to Jackson and says, "Sir, we got to take you out of here," because he'd been wounded. He'd been burned and he had fragment wounds from the shrapnel. And I've gone beyond it. But then Jackson turns to the corpsman and says, "I can't go." And the corpsman says, "Well, why can't you go, sir? You've been wounded." He said, "I can't go because he," and he's pointing at me, "has the only camera." And all the rest of Jackson's gear was in that vehicle. It was blown and burned to pieces. I mean, there was a little metal plate from the bottom of his camera, PD-170, right, guys? PD-170 camera, that's all that was left of his little metal plate. So it's all fried. And he says, "North has the only camera." Like, the corpsman is now thinking, this guy's got traumatic brain injury, maybe a terrible concussion. "Sir, you got to come." He says, "I can't go. North has the only camera." And the corpsman finally says, "Well, so what?" He says, "Let me just tell you something. In every hour of Oliver North's videotape, there are 5 or 6 really good seconds. I can do better." And he stayed. Secretary of the Navy, a few weeks later, we're at this base right here. The Secretary of the Navy comes out on a command visit. It's a secret base. It's operating right over on the Iranian border. And the Secretary of the Navy is walking out of the briefing that he'd just gotten with the special operations guys. And he walks over to me and he says, "I want to meet your cameraman. Is he still in country?" I said, "Well, that's the cameraman standing right over there, sir. He's the guy that did it." He says, "Is that camera on?" I said, "It better be. I mean, you're the Secretary of the Navy." He said, "Oh, no, we can't. I said, "No, you want to meet him? There he is, Chris Jackson." And he walked over to Jackson and said, "I'm going to see to it that you're recognized for your heroism." Now, that to me says something about, not Fox News, not Chris Jackson, it says something about our military, that the Secretary of a service would do that for a young cameraman who saved the life of another guy. This is, by the way, I put this up there just because it's so interesting. I looked at this little kid and I said, that's got to be the son of a Russian soldier. This is Afghanistan. Very interesting, the interpreter, who was a graduate of UCLA, and he was born in the United States, but his parents fled Afghanistan in the 1970s, and just before the total collapse in '79 and the Russian invasion. And his parents raised him in the United States, but he speaks fluent Tajik. And so we're up along that part of the area where Pashto is less of a language than Tajik. And he said, I said, "That's got to be the son." He says, "No, wait, so the kid's way too young to be part of a Russian, progeny. That's Alexander the Great." Think about it. This is exactly where Alexander stopped on his way across Asia. And that is indeed, that kid is not Slavic, it's Macedonian. This is a shura that's taking place in the process. This is a very brave Afghan battalion commander. And I can't use his name, and we couldn't use his face in the show that we did, the documentary that we produced on it, but I put him up because there's a lot of press that says these guys aren't worth anything. They've all been trained by U.S. Special Forces and U.S. Marine MARSOCs. The commandos out there are as good as any other nation's military, and certainly better than most. And these are young guys who have gone out and decided that they're going to fight for their country. You never see that in the so-called mainstream media. Now, why don't you see it? I can't explain why we get so little coverage of these guys, but they're actually much better than you would otherwise think. That's a very tough Afghan commando right there. He was on the raid that we took down in the middle of the desert. That was prep for the raid. This is the raid itself, and took down a Taliban kingpin in the process.